One small, careless moment can undo the most carefully planned crime. Not because the killer panicked, not because police crocked some brilliant code, but because of something ordinary, something accidental, something no one thought would matter. In true crime, we often imagine cases being solved by relentless detectives or dramatic confessions, but some of the most shocking crimes in history were exposed for a much simpler reason: an accident, a coincidence, a mistake no one planned for. And in these cases, that accident changed everything. It starts with a simple truth investigators rarely admit out loud. Most criminals don't get caught because they're hunted down. They get caught because they trip over themselves. They say the wrong thing, they show up at the wrong time, or they do something completely unrelated that suddenly shines a light on a crime no one was even looking for. One of the clearest examples began with what looked like a routine traffic stop. Late one night, a man was pulled over for a minor violation. Nothing dramatic, no weapons drawn, just paperwork. But when the officer ran his license, something felt off. Not enough to arrest him, just enough to ask a few extra questions. The man answered calmly, too calmly. While speaking, the officer noticed a smell coming from the trunk. It wasn't strong, it wasn't obvious, but it didn't belong. When the trunk was opened, it didn't reveal a body, it revealed something worse. Items connected to a missing person case from another state, a case no one had linked to this man. Up until that moment, investigators didn't even know they were looking at a suspect. But that traffic stop, a random, forgettable decision, unraveled a crime that had gone cold for months. And if stories like this make you stop and think, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Casefile Commentary TV. It helps more people find these cases and keeps new ones coming every week. And that wasn't luck, it was accident. Another case began inside a hospital. A woman arrived at the emergency room with severe injuries. She told doctors she'd fallen down the stairs. It wasn't unusual, except for one detail. Her injuries didn't match the story. Doctors see falls every day. They know the patterns, and this wasn't one of them. Still, they treated her and let her go. Days later, she was back, this time unconscious. While reviewing her records, a nurse noticed something strange. The previous visit, the same explanation, the same type of injuries. Hospital staff contacted police not because they suspected murder, but because something wasn't right. Investigators visited the woman's home. What they found there exposed years of abuse and a killing that had been disguised as an accident. The person responsible hadn't slipped up at the crime scene. They hadn't confessed. They hadn't been reported. They were exposed because a medical professional noticed a pattern by accident. But some of the most chilling cases are solved when killers expose themselves without realizing it. In one investigation, a man contacted police repeatedly to help with a missing person case. He offered tips, theories, speculation. At first, investigators welcomed it. Concerned citizens are common in high-profile cases. But something about him stood out. He knew details that hadn't been released, small things, insignificant on their own. When questioned, he explained it away. He'd read it online, he'd heard it from someone else. But those details weren't public, and no one else had mentioned them. Investigators later discovered the man wasn't trying to help, he was trying to relive the crime. He didn't plan to expose himself, he wanted attention, control, validation, and not desire became the accident that ended his freedom. Sometimes the exposure comes years later. In another case, police reopened an unsolved murder after DNA technology advanced. Evidence had been sitting in storage for decades, not because investigators were incompetent, but because the science simply didn't exist yet. When the sample was finally tested, it matched a man already in prison for an unrelated offense. He hadn't been arrested for murder, he'd been caught for something minor years later, a burglary, a parole violation. That unrelated crime put his DNA into the system, and that single, unconnected arrest exposed a killing that had haunted a family for generations. The accident wasn't the evidence, it was time. These cases all share something unsettling. The killers didn't lose control. They didn't make dramatic mistakes. They weren't undone by brilliant interrogations. They were exposed by the ordinary world colliding with their secret. A traffic stop, a hospital visit, a conversation, a database update. Moments no one could predict. And that raises a disturbing question. How many crimes are still hidden simply because the accident hasn't happened yet? How many killers are walking free not because they're smarter than investigators, but because chance hasn't turned against them? True crime isn't always about justice winning. Sometimes it's about patience. Sometimes it's about time. And sometimes it's about a single careless moment that finally breaks the silence. If you value careful storytelling and cases that make you think long after the video ends, consider subscribing to Casefile Commentary TV. New investigations, unanswered questions, every week.